All of these behaviors that we are talking about can also be called pain-based behaviors. These behaviors have several characteristics. First, they are learned over time. So, what do we mean by this? Essentially, they're behaviors that a young person developed probably over years during their childhood. Spoiler alert, this also means that changing them cannot happen overnight. In most cases, they were actually skills that the young person developed that helped them survive in childhood. So, a child faced with a volatile parent is going to learn to withdraw or to be alert all the time without even realizing that that is not really typical. These behaviors are also patterns. So, there's something that triggers the behavior, and then usually the behavior follows whatever the young person learned when they were younger. So, one thing to remember here is that you might not be present for the trigger. Sometimes it might be obvious, something that happens right in front of you, but sometimes it might be something that happened before they got to you that day. Lastly, pain based behaviors are not really known to the person as being pain based. They are as normal to them as pulling your hand away from a hot stove would be to us. It's what they grew up doing, it's all they've known often. I've worked with many young people who, when discussing some incident afterwards, not only could not identify a different way to respond, the idea that there were different ways to respond hadn't even really occurred to them because they'd never seen anything else. Often, when we're dealing with pain based behaviors, we can find ourselves saying to ourselves, our self talk, some version of this: what's wrong with this young person? This could be a young person who's very late every day or who gets defensive really quickly. Or it could be the person who cuts us off in traffic or is rude in line at the grocery store. Often, our first instinct, and we may not even be aware of it, is to say to ourselves, geez, what is their problem? The trauma informed approach, above anything else, asks us to change the question we're asking. There's a lot more to it than and what it can mean to be trauma informed, but really the root of it is this shift. It feels like it should be easy to make, but in practice, it's harder than it seems. The shift that we're making is away from what's wrong with you and towards what happened to you. If you take nothing else from this training, I hope you take this. I can say for myself that in my own work, this shift changed everything for me. And as an aside, you can bring this from work to the rest of your life, and it can be quite the game changer. So, when we make this shift, we are activating the part of our brain that is curious and empathetic instead of the part of our brain that's judgmental. And that is really key for showing up for traumatized young people in the way that they need us to. So, a brief story time. I once met someone who worked in a residential care facility. He was in charge of getting everyone up in the morning. And every day there was one young guy who he said was always giving him trouble. As he saw it, it would take him ages to get this young man up. He'd have to come in and practically drag him out of bed. He absolutely thought to himself, what is wrong with this kid? Why can't he get up? He said that everything changed for him the day that he learned that young man's father used to beat him out of bed every morning. In that context, this young person's behavior made total sense. And it was what had happened to him that really explained everything.